Hey everybody, I'm Seth Matlins. Welcome to Forbes, the CEO's Guide to Marketing. And today I'm sitting with a guy who I have known, I don't know, what is it, like 15 years, right?
Yeah,
Maybe a little longer.
Yeah.
Frank Cooper, who is the CMO of Visa currently. And Frank, I'm going to do that awkward thing where I'm going to read a bit of your bio and then we're going to get into the conversation. But thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here, Seth. And, I love having our conversations. We have conversations, off camera.
Yes, we do.
That I equally enjoy. So,
yes, we do. I appreciate that. But, you say that because I put out lists and put a microphone in front of your face.
Right.
All right. So here's the bio part of it. Quite a career you've had and are having. Frank Cooper III currently serves as the Chief Marketing Officer for Visa Inc. His role spans across marketing Visa's products, services, and solutions in over 200 markets and covers consumer, B2B, product marketing, and marketing services sectors. We're going to get into the breadth of that remit because it is quite unusual for many a CMO to have something that broad. Frank's widely recognized for his unique blending of commerce and culture, his approach to driving growth, business optimization, and his leveraging of creativity for impactful business results has made him a transforming figure across multiple industries, including entertainment, technology, consumer goods, and financial services. Prior to joining Visa, what year was it? I meant to
2022.
22,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I remember actually having conversations the holiday of 21, right before
Exactly
you started.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Before Visa, Frank served as CMO at BlackRock and PepsiCo. He was the CMO and Chief Creative Officer at Buzzfeed, and among many, many other industry and other accolades, Frank's been named to both the Forbes Entrepreneurial CMO 50 list and the Forbes World's Most Influential CMOs list. Thanks for being here, man.
Great to be here, man.
All right, you know where we start, which is we just jump in with these, questions, and the premise is quick answers, but as you said to me right before we got on camera, they could all go longer. So we'll see what happens.
Okay.
Let's start with the first one. Marketing is?
Yeah. So marketing. See, these are philosophical questions.
But
we're gonna figure it out. So marketing. I'll try to say it as concisely as I can. Marketing is a set of strategies and tactics designed to shift people's perceptions, emotions, and behaviors to drive sustainable, profitable growth. And I think it's all those things together. It's a little bit of a mouthful. It's partly why it's often difficult to communicate it. But I think it's all those things.
I mean, I think it's, excuse me, I think it's on point. And, the conversation you and I have had previously about that has been, it's not just the shifting of perception, but the creation of perception,
100%.
Which arguably could fall under shifting, because if there's no perception, you're shifting too.
Totally. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Oh, and I'm sure we're going to get into it. And that's, for me, part of the challenge that we are facing is that if you're shifting behaviors, the exterior thing, everyone gets that. You can talk to the C-suite about that.
Yeah.
It's science, exterior sensory experience. Right. We measure, but often what we're doing, we're tapping into the interior dimension of people, perceptions and behaviors. And perceptions and emotions. And it's not the language that business is comfortable with.
I couldn't possibly agree with you more. In fact, a lot of what I've talked about since getting to Forbes, and probably before that, people just listen to me more now that I'm at Forbes and not on the agency side, is it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Yeah. And I've shared, and I'll put this in the notes. I think I shared it at the end of last year. Kind of I believe it's called the iceberg of behaviors, right? Yeah. Which is, it starts with the things you cannot measure. Most of the things that influence what we can measure sit below the surface. Yeah. And at best we measure them qualitatively. But how do you measure emotion? Yeah. How do you measure values? How do you measure beliefs, concerns, fears, needs, all of which, self-perception, identity, all of which go into driving purchase behavior?
No doubt about it. But to me, it's part of this long-term, multi-century long process of scientific imperialism, which is, and by the way, I think science is great. I believe in it. So I'm not one of the non-believers in science.
You might want to take off the tinfoil hat.
Exactly. I practice it. But the imperialism is really a narrow view of science, which gives credence to only things that you can measure through sensory experience. And so What I believe is that you can apply the scientific method to both. We just don't do it because people aren't used to it. So the scientific method of like, what's the practice or the injunction of the formula? Then you have a direct experiential evidence from that. And then you have a community of people who confirm or reject that.
Can you give us an example of it?
So if I'll use something outside of business, meditation. People say, okay, that's an interior dimension. You'll never be able to tell whether meditation is effective or not. Well, actually, there's a practice around that. And they'll say, here's the things that you can do in meditation. You will have a direct experiential evidence from that. What did you experience through that? You will communicate that. And then there's a community of people who confirm, like, yes, that's actually how it's articulated. That's the experience that you should have. I think you can apply that same logic to some of these other things that we have in the interior dimension, right? And so the link though that we're missing is that even if you said in marketing, the goal is to get people to prefer things. Even if you said, hey, in marketing, I will. I'm gonna actually make this person feel great about my brand.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna make the brand feel cool, and they're gonna internalize that. And in internalizing that, and so there's a practice for doing that. Then you say, okay, now they actually feel that. The question is, what impact does it have on the business?
Right,
and that's where it becomes a little bit challenging,
right,
I think, for us.
And so. How do you go about explaining that? Or, I don't want to make it about where you are, but how do you recommend CMOs who work for CEOs and CFOs who don't know jack about marketing, which is, of course, the thesis and premise for why we created the show. How do you go about helping them understand that there is no such thing as perfect measurement, and some of the most important things, again, that drive to purchase, to that preference and behavior?
Yeah, I wish I had the perfect answer for it. I don't, because if I did, I would be selling. My budget would be triple today.
Yes.
But I'll tell you, there's a few things I've learned. Along the way. Number one, what doesn't help is saying, "Oh, they just don't get it," and I've heard that a lot, actually. People like, they just don't get it. Go in there, tell them what you do in marketing, in marketing terms, and let it go. And that's the premise of this whole thing that you're talking about right now.
Yeah, but I want to tie it back to something you said earlier. While it may be true that they just don't get it, that comes from an absence of experience, certainly not in many, if not most cases, an absence of intellect, right? So that they don't get it is true. It's the marketer's job to shift perception back to what you were saying.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And in doing that, it's you can focus on their lack of experience in marketing or start from where they are.
That's right.
Which is most of them have had an experience outside of marketing. It could be financial, it could be sales, it could be operations. And I think our job in marketing is to translate what we're doing back into language and the frameworks that they can understand.
That's right. I mean, first rule of comedy, know your audience.
Know your audience and frame everything for that. What I've tried to do, Seth, is try to frame it in terms of, to get us out of this marketing jargon, in terms of profitable consumer behavior. So like, what are the behaviors that if we shift these behaviors, that everyone would agree that, yeah, if you did that, actually, I believe that will contribute to incremental revenue or profit, then that's the thing we try to move. Mm-hmm. And so it gets you out of the marketing jargon of impressions and affinity. It's like, if I can get someone to put their credential into a digital wallet first, does that become the default credential for everyday usage? Right. And so then the thing we're going to measure is how many people can we get to put the Visa credential into that digital wallet. Right. Profitable consumer behavior.
Right. Right. I'm kind of stuck on your reference of impressions, which I remember literally from, first months of my career, where my job was to hang Avion banners and place coolers on tennis courts. Yeah. I'd get a media equivalency report from our agency, and they'd say, that cooler generated, $400,000 in media equivalency. Yeah. And even at 23, which is a long time ago, I was like, that is such fucking nonsense.
Yeah.
But what did I do? I took it and sent it to the CEO. I was like, that cooler.
That's right.
And I think that speaks, despite how dated it was, and at the danger of it being N of one, that we're so off topic, but do you think it speaks to the challenge that has been implicit in what we've been talking about at the beginning of the show here, which is, does marketing have an attribution problem? And is marketing's attribution problem not in fact an attribution problem, but an attribution truth, which is to say, going back to what you said in Maslow's hierarchy, you can't always attribute everything directly. There is no such thing as a perfect measurement.
There is no such thing as a perfect measurement. But that's true in everything. It's funny. People talk about the process of marketing, and those who are skeptical of it, they will say, well, does that really add value, that step, or does that really contribute to a sale? And you superimpose that same logic on the sales process. You could say that all along the way until the actual sale happens, right? You can say, well, and you got a list of people, potential people. Okay, great. Does that really contribute to it?
Yeah.
Now you've kind of narrowed that list down to real prospects. Is that really going to contribute to it? Let's see. But there's a muscle memory and a experience around that process that gives them confidence that if you do these things, scientific process again, if you do these things, this outcome will occur.
Yeah.
That you will get a certain amount of sales. In marketing, there's less confidence in that, because what we've done, and this is why I think we do have an attribution problem, is that when you land on if you do these things, this is the outcome that will happen. People go like, well, but I don't understand how to interpret that outcome in terms of what's meaningful to me.
Yeah, but yes, and yes. And with apologies to our listeners who have heard me talk about this before, because it does seem to come up within the context of all of these shows, which is, it's fascinating to me. It continues to be fascinating to me that the CEO, the CFO, the CTO, who may be skeptical of marketing, is somehow not skeptical of the fact that they choose to wear, brand X over brand Y, that their pantry is filled with branded goods, that they drive.
Oh yeah.
If you every one of those BMW, Mercedes driving CEOs, just to pick two marks.
Yeah.
If you said, hey, exact same car, 50% less per month, Honda on it, would they take it?
Yeah.
Fuck no.
No, exactly.
Right. But brand doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Except when it does.
Now I got to say, and this is one of the beautiful things for me at Visa, is that there's unanimity around the fact that brand matters for us.
Yeah.
And in that payments category, it really matters. You need buyers who have trust in the brand. You need merchants who believe that it's reliable, that the underlying product is reliable. You need ubiquity, so people know they can take it anywhere.
And those have been the fundamentals of the Visa business for decades.
100%. And that's why the brand matters so much, because it takes decades to build that kind of trust. Even if you look at some of the fintech companies that are doing really, really well, if there's a gap, the gap will be around trust. Because it takes a long time for people to believe, what, something goes wrong, I know I can rely on that brand. So brand really matters in the category. And that's one good starting point that we have. Within Visa.
I'm thinking about all the crypto advertising that we saw in the 2022 Super Bowl. So it was right as you started.
Yeah.
And 3 or 4 different crypto companies and brands ran spots. All of them were about getting rich, not missing kind of the opportunity. 0 of them were about trust.
Yeah.
And people didn't understand the category. I'm not sure people still do.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was a huge strategic miss. But I want to, we've kind of been talking to this second question, but I want to see if I can get a functional, not a functional, but a tight definition from you. With all of our conversations so far about the importance of brand, how do you define what a brand is?
Another philosophical question, Seth, which I know you know this. Okay, here's my working definition of it is that a brand is shorthand in people's minds and in culture that lead them to prefer a company's products or services.
So if that, I like that a lot. Is that, let me ask you to parse that.
Yeah.
Is that what a brand is, or what a good brand is?
Or
what a good brand does.
I think if you don't meet that threshold, that it's a shorthand, first of all. So
Mhm.
like, quick reference, I think of something very specific about this when I think of the brand, and that is meaningful
Yeah.
in someone's mind, but also I think meaningful in culture. Like, where does it sit? You can pull the culture piece out and
Mhm.
still
Mhm.
still have a brand. But I think even the most basic functional brands have a place in culture. Tide,
Mhm.
detergent,
Yeah.
seems very basic and functional, but there's a reason people keep coming back and buying, the big brand detergents, even if all the ingredients look the same
But
to you.
is it Tide's place in culture? And I'm sure Mark Pritchard will have a point of view on this, and we should ask:
Yeah.
is it Tide's place in culture, or is it what you were saying about Visa, which is decades of earning trust in product efficacy, price value?
I think it's a combination of it. I mean, there's a culture around cleaning. You go look at TikTok videos and
Look,
see how long TikTok.
I have OCD. My house is immaculate.
Yeah.
I live in the culture of cleaning.
Yeah,
I love my Swiffer, by the way, Mark.
I've gotten it through Nina, my wife. so I'm firmly in that culture. But I think it's both for the strongest brands.
Yeah.
But I think the most important part is that it's a shorthand that leads you to prefer
Yeah.
the product or services. That's the most important part.
Not speaking about your job, but kind of, your job as you have it now, but you've held, I think this is your fourth CMO job.
Yeah.
What's the hardest part of being a CMO today?
It's kind of what we're discussing here. I think, the hardest job of being a CMO today to me is getting a shared view of which set of marketing strategies and tactics actually drive the business outcomes that matter to the firm. And so no matter where you go, where I've been at least, is that convincing someone that doing X, whether it's a sponsorship, whether it's a social posting, whether it's a experiential event, that actually drives an outcome that matters, that's the hardest part of this job.
So one of the things that, as I've thought about the episodes we've released so far, that I don't think I've done a good job in covering with our guests is kind of that the time period over which one should expect to see an outcome.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm wondering how in the lessons that marketers need to provide, the understanding lesson sounds pejorative and unfair, in the understanding that marketers need to provide to those who do not understand marketing, but whose decisions, CEO and CFO, influence a CMO's ability to market successfully, is not just what to expect, but what to and what not to, but on what timeline.
Yeah.
And so, again, Visa, let's just stick with Visa for a second, but I know you've done this throughout your career. Visa has a long equity with some of the most blue chip sponsorship properties in the world, decades again. Today, if you were to get into so I imagine there's some institutional knowledge and understanding that even if we don't know how it works, we know that it works.
100% right. Yeah.
But how would you recommend to a CMO who is talking to a CEO without that understanding that they kind of frame the expectation and the timeline on which to see what kind of returns from that kind of activity, recognizing so much depends on activation and other shit?
Yeah, Seth, you're hitting on such a great point, which is that these things unfold over time, and again, referencing sales. The sales cycles for some of the things that we do, they're long sales cycles.
Yes.
And there is there's patience around that, and there's confidence that you're moving along the way. But within the sales, again, they have markers along the way that give people confidence that we're heading in the right direction.
Can you give our listeners an example of a long sales cycle and a marker or two?
Well, so you have an initial conversation with an existing client or a new client. You find out what their challenges are. You narrow those challenges down. You come back, and the first real moment of truth is the feedback that you get on how you're framing up the challenges and whether you or not your product is a solution.
Did you listen? Did you hear? Did you understand?
Now, if you're getting positive feedback, we think that product can be a solution for us. That's step one. And people feel like, okay, we're getting momentum. We'll put a percentage of probability of success based on that. in marketing, I think we can do the same thing. It's what I was calling profitable consumer behaviors, but what are the leading indicators along the way that get you there?
So I think what you're talking about is the funnel, right? And back in the day when you and I started our careers, the funnel was very linear, and today it looks like tangled computer wires, headphone wires, right? But the broadly, you're not going to sell a product somebody's not aware of. You're not going to sell or service. You're not going to sell a product or service that somebody doesn't understand. You're not going to sell one that they're not interested in, right? So broadly, while it's no longer linear, those milestone markers are still fundamentally true, right?
100%. I just think to the kind of tangled web that you're describing, I think we have to get more precise on what happens in that funnel or through that cycle. So awareness, if no one knows your product, it makes no difference. Salience, or fame or familiarity. You have to decide which one of these things really matter. And then the way I look at it, there's a flywheel that happens around relevance, usage, and trust. Yeah. And those, you can hit any of those things and they start feeding on each other. Yeah. That matters a lot. And then you lead to preference. And then there's levels of preference that lead to loyalty and advocacy. And so if you can get alignment on something like that, then you can pick one thing out early on. Hey, this is a new product. No one knows what it is. If I can increase awareness by this amount and salience by this amount, do we all agree that's a big step forward? Everyone probably would say yes.
So one of the things I'm wondering is, it's great. In the language you use was, when I asked, come back, what's the hardest part of being a CMO? It's creating that shared view of my words now, the levers to pull, the resources to allocate, the path forward. I'm kind of wondering, well, that's great. That takes a long fucking time. Like, isn't it simpler just to say you hired me? I'm not saying this is easy. You hired me to do a job because of who I am, what I've done, and how I look at the world. Just let me do it and trust in my expertise. Like, why is there that absence of trust in a CMO's expertise?
Wow. I don't think it's necessarily at least I don't interpret it as an absence of trust in the CMO's expertise. I see it as, in order to work through the complex problems that are facing most businesses, to capture the opportunities, you need multiple parts of the organization to come together with marketing to make it work. I got to work closely with the head of product,
of course,
to make sure that those products, features, and benefits actually deliver on some of the promises that we're going to make through the brand. You got to work with someone who's in cross-border travel to make sure that we understand what are the key travel corridors. Yeah, you can't do it alone, and it doesn't. And that I'm just giving you the payments category, but you pick any complex organization, unless you're selling like a singular kind of SaaS product. Any complex organization that has a complex set of products. In a matrix organization, you need others to come along with you.
Yeah, you're speaking to something that I think a lot about, which is everything is marketing, and anyone inside an organization and or external to it, in today's everybody's connected to everyone world, can influence the trajectory of a brand or a business in an instant.
100%.
And while we cannot control for what happens externally, we can influence, we can't control. I cannot help but think, and I just get firmer in my conviction, that if CEOs and CFOs had a better understanding of those interdependencies, that interconnectedness, right? The fact that everything connects to whether that purchase preference are driven, they might organize organizations differently.
Yeah.
What do you think the hardest part of being a CEO is? We always like to have a moment of empathy.
Just one moment. Exactly. Look, I mean, that's an incredibly hard gig. I mean, because you're managing multiple stakeholders, from employees to the board, to the community, to, in our business, regulators, and policymakers. And so it's an incredibly complex job. But to me, the most difficult part of that, and the most important part, is how do you attract, retain, and motivate talent so that they're working as a team to produce kind of optimal outcomes. And I think that's the most important thing. And how do you do it? I think is you have to establish this culture where people feel like they are working for something bigger than themselves, and a culture of curiosity where they're constantly wanting to get better and they want the company to get better. It's an incredibly difficult job. But to me, that's the most important. Get the right people in the right place, motivate them to work as a team, and great things tend to happen from that.
Yeah. I saw a definition, and apologies to the source whom I can't recall, of being, and it might have been from a CEO, that, a CEO is like, being an investment banker. It's all about resource allocation, human capital and time, right?
Yeah.
To drive optimal outcomes. And there was something in that I quite loved. While of course it is so simple that it runs the risk of being simplistic and ignores so many of the things that you just brought up. I do think about it in the context of this show and the problem we're trying to solve for with it in terms of that resource allocation. There's data that shows that, most CMOs don't even think they get the resources requisite to delivering on agreed upon strategies.
Yeah.
In your career's experience, you have like off the top of your head, a gut on like what percentage of CEOs, CFOs, C-suites on marketing as an expense rather than an investment in growth?
Oof. Wow, that's a hard one.
Give or take. I know you got to go back through a lot of CEOs and CFOs.
I'll say beyond my direct experience and from what I've seen and various marketers I've talked to and CMOs I've talked to and CEOs particularly across different industries, I'd say 85% feel like they don't have a grasp of or confidence in marketing driving specific enough outcomes so that they would invest even more money to accelerate those outcomes.
Yeah.
And then I see other companies, that 15% that do it tend to do well, but the attribution to why they're doing well oftentimes doesn't go to marketing. Like if I look at NVIDIA, great product, right place, AI chips, that's the right place. It's going to take off. But the marketing that Jensen's done around that has been extraordinary. There's storytelling around the product the set of products that they're building that actually elevated it to a point where it captured people's imagination and people started spreading the word for them. And it gave it top spin. And everyone uses Steve Jobs as that, but you can see that among a small set of CEOs.
Yeah, I think for good and ill, right? So if NVIDIA is an example of the success of that, and I agree, it kind of, there are examples where Bob Chapek at Disney during his short tenure, where he said one thing or didn't say one thing, as it turned out, as it related to the Florida Don't Say Gay law, and everything changed, including its stock performance. Which brings us back to what we were talking about earlier, which is marketing is everything. And I think it's kind of marketing is everything and everything is marketing. And yet only so much is within the CMO's control, even if they have a greater accountability than they do control.
But that's why it's a true statement and a dangerous statement at the same time that marketing is everything and everything is marketing. It is absolutely true. The danger of it is that it makes it even more difficult for those who are not in marketing in the C-suite to identify where to invest. If everything's marketing and marketing is everything, where do I put the money? And so there's got to be a set of strategies and tactics that you land on. Even though you can't control everything, control what you can control. And you can control what you can control, set it forth, say, if I do these things, this is what I can change in terms of people's perceptions, emotions, or behaviors. And if I make those changes, do we agree that in some way leads to greater revenue?
I love you bringing up kind of the dangerous part of it, because you're, of course, absolutely right. But I wonder then, and I'm making this up as I say it, if we use marketing as proxy for enterprise growth, sustainable, profitable enterprise growth, then, going back to what Peter Drucker said so many years ago, right? the modern organization, I'm bastardizing this a little bit, the modern organization has two functions, innovation and marketing, both of which are there to serve growth.
Yes.
Right. And so, those interdependencies, product doesn't exist, finance doesn't exist, tech doesn't exist in isolation. It is there to service the needs of the enterprise.
Yes.
As it seeks to grow.
Yes.
Profitably and sustainably. I'm just mindful of time, and there are a few things I want to get to.
Yeah,
I want to ask you one more question from the seven. We've touched on this a little bit, but if you could wave the proverbial magic wand and address one macro misconception amongst the world's largest companies about what marketing is and what marketers do, what might it be?
Magic wand.
I have one in my bag.
Exactly. Give me two. Look, if we could dispel the misconception that marketing is not commercial, that would be the one. That would be the thing I would wave and wish and hope. And it's kind of at the foundation of everything we're talking about. Marketing is interesting. Marketing is cool. Marketing is necessary. Marketing moves intangible things, but it's not commercial. And I think that's the greatest fallacy, the most dangerous misconception facing marketing.
I love that. Let me ask you about your time in private equity. And not only, were you the CMO of one of the world's largest, second largest, right?
Largest. So BlackRock currently has about $11 trillion of assets under management, primarily asset manager, but it goes across asset management, private equity, private credit, of course, a huge indexing business in ETFs. Yeah.
So not a category or a group of very few players that's historically been known to be marketing centric.
Yeah.
What do you think they understood about the role and efficacy of marketing that a CEO who might be skeptical about marketing as a commercial engine, because who's more commercially oriented than PE might benefit from?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question, and I'll tell you, it was a strange move when people said, "Wait, Frank, you were in music and Pepsi and Buzzfeed, now BlackRock," and it was one of the best things I ever could have done for me, in part because it gave me a deeper insight into what B2B marketing really is. And so part of it was the B2B marketing side of it. And what they understood was that, there's a sales team that is the main point of contact with a client, but the complexity of the buying process requires a different kind of discipline. So, how are you going to kind of make sure we are perceived as continue to be perceived as thought leaders? How are you going to create some kind of emotional connection between the client and our firm, even though we say they're making decisions based on kind of rational grounds only? How do you
wait? I'm sorry. Did the folks understand that people's decisions are often irrationally driven, but rationally rationalized?
Yes.
Oh, that puts them miles ahead of so many.
100%. 100%. You got to say, so one of the greatest stories ever to me is how BlackRock was formed. So Larry was a rock star banker, on his way to the very, very top at First Boston, and then one day lost $100 million. One day. And
it's happened to all of us.
Exactly. And when he realized, he did not get fired. He's still there, but his trajectory changed. But what he realized is that he said, you know what? I don't understand really the risk I took when I made $100 million or the risk I took when I lost $100 million.
Self-awareness, it's quite a thing.
100%. And so he said, well, can I take that and become much more disciplined around understanding risk? And that's really how BlackRock was formed. It came out of that kind of that deep understanding of a gap in the marketplace that he could fill, but through a personal experience. And so,
as most entrepreneurial ventures begin, right?
100%.
They don't always begin with that level of self-awareness. They may begin with a identifying a void in the marketplace, but for that void to start with that level of, with really that strategic insight as much as, well, that's unfair to a bazillion startups who are founded on strategic insights, but to approach it from a risk perspective.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think it goes back to the question we were talking about just a moment ago, is marketing an investment or an expense? I find it, again, curious that, the CFO, who has her own portfolio of stocks, I'm sure, expects no certainty from those investments, expects a certain volume of risk within those investments, looks at brands within those categories, and yet doesn't understand marketing within her own company this way.
Yeah, but this kind of ties back to BlackRock a bit. But I think every CFO is willing to say there's some percentage that I won't understand, and so there's some variability that will happen in your actions. But can you give me something that allows me to predict what the outcomes are going to be?
Yeah.
And I'll say what BlackRock got right, and what we tried to build in the marketing function is understanding that on a B2B basis, on a client basis. Different from the B2C side, which we can get to, but on the B2B basis, if we got these touch points with clients, if we increase NPS, if we kind of outline the entire buyer decision-making matrix, and we got a certain percentage and it reached a tipping point, it starts to feel, while it's not completely scientific in the sense that we know with 100% certainty that there's a causal relationship between all these activities and the outcome, the correlation starts to become clear. And you start to see it in a more consistent way. And in my experience, I think that's all the CFO in particular is asking for. Some of them want complete causal relationships, but if you can give more predictability to it, I think that's a big step forward.
Yeah. And by the way, that is the job of everyone within an enterprise who's asking for resource allocation. Yeah. And I think you're right. And sometimes I may be a little harsh on our C-suite colleagues. But I can't help but think sometimes predictability has become, to use a phrase I did earlier, proxy for certainty.
Yeah.
Right? There ain't no such thing as a sure thing.
I know. And you're 100% right. It slips into that all the time. And
just, it's bizarre.
Yeah. And again, I think, if you can build the relationship with the CFO where you get that confidence, great. The CEO needs to weigh in on it, though, too.
Of course, they have ultimate accountability.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let me ask you a question about culture. You spent you were in the world of being part of culture and marketing through and with culture before the rest of the world was even talking about culture. You and I grew up in it.
Yeah.
Many a brand today is talking about moving at the speed of culture. Never want to hear that phrase again,
I know. I would do that.
Because while it's true, it's no longer differentiating.
That's right.
It's a necessity. It's not a differentiator. What's your perspective on how brands need to kind of have, a give and take with culture, and in particular, a give, right? So much of the conversation is about jumping on a trend like being very demure, to pick a random example. And that's piggybacking. It's not bad necessarily, but it's not bringing anything to culture. And I know you have a very focused opinion on the responsibility of business to positively affect culture. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I love this question. And look, it's really interesting because even at BlackRock, and certainly at Visa, one of the things I pushed hard on was that financial services, for the longest, believed that it was separate from culture. That, you had a set of clients, set of activities.
Well, money is at the heart of culture.
Money is at the heart of culture. This is one of the most cultural things that you can imagine, right? And we can go into the whole thing of the fiction of money, which D. Hock, the founder of Visa, really talked a lot about. But there was a long period where people felt like financial services was divorced from culture, but money's at the center of it. But all aspects of financial well-being is at the center of it. Like how you earn your money people started realizing, well, how I earn my money is really kind of a deeply cultural thing because it says something about me and who I am and what I aspire to become and in my sense of purpose in life, how you spend it.
It talks about options, constraints, implicit in opportunity in the absence of equity of opportunity,
100%.
Quality of it.
Yeah, 100%. So my main point though is that my experience is that virtually everything that I've seen in every industry is in some way embedded in culture.
Yeah.
And you got to find the cultural spaces. For a brand, where I see the brands go wrong is when they actually want to withdraw things from the culture or latch on to or get some kind of benefit from being adjacent to culture. And I think consumers are way too smart for that right now. And so the only way I see really having sustainable advantages by leveraging cultural branding is to become an active member within a cultural space. You actively contribute.
Culture, is that a community?
It could be a community, from a campfire community to a large community. Mm-hmm. It can be and usually it's a community, but it can be in spaces like music, video gaming, creator culture, but always it's going to be a collective. It's going to be a group of people, who have some kind of shared view of the world, shared aspirations, shared history, and if you parachute in and you want to extract from that, people are much more protective of that today. And they're like, well, we'll take that money from you, but we give you no credit for it.
Right.
I think you only get credit if you add value to the community and add value to the culture. And so if I'm going into a sport, my ultimate goal is to add value to the fan experience or to the athlete experience.
So this actually brings us back to what we're talking about with how you might sell in a sponsorship to somebody. But so I just want to acknowledge that thread, but I don't want to repeat it. But obviously, business isn't philanthropic, and so excuse me. Means and ends. Adding value to being a legitimate, authentic, contributing part of culture is a strategy that is intended to drive purchase and preference on the back end.
100%. Yeah.
How does one think about balancing that input, knowing that you are in it appropriately, by the way? I've long said the purpose of purpose is profit.
Exactly right.
And but that you're in it for commercial return.
Yeah. And for me, it takes you back to the whole measurement framework that we were talking about before, the funnel. And so like if you went across that and you said relevance is really important. Well, for me, the way I think about relevance, I split it into two categories. There's category relevance. It's important to my, payment experience or something, but then there's cultural relevance. It's important in my life.
Right.
And the brands that really matter, the ones that are sustained, the ones that can transcend direct competition, do both.
And there's science around the efficacy of that, right?
100%.
I mean, I can't help but think of, it's mental availability from Byron Sharp's book.
100% right. And equal to that, at least our research shows that if you can increase relevance, it increases usage, increases trust, all of which, and individually, by the way, all of which drives preference.
Right.
And if you drive preference, which I think is the ultimate goal of the brand, then you drive payment volume and transactions.
Because preference is the ultimate competitive advantage.
100% right.
Right.
Otherwise, why are we doing it? Because
right.
if you do it all and people say like, what, that brand's cool, but I still prefer that brand, then your marketing was completely ineffective. Ultimately, you're trying to get someone to prefer your product or services over a competitor's, and do it in a consistent way. And then if you do it really, really well, that preference turns into some kind of loyalty, or advocacy. I
saw somebody post on LinkedIn. It was it was in December, some version of, when all is said and done, marketing comes down to why you. And I sent them a note. It might have been Chris, but I can't remember. Forgive me. I said, I think this is right, but at the risk of adding more words, it's why you and not them.
Yes.
Right? Because it can be why you and them.
That's right.
Right? Which is the consideration set.
That's exactly right. That's exactly. I totally agree with that. And to me, you boil everything that we've been talking about comes down to that. And if you can't show that or show the leading indicators, the indicators that will lead to that, then it's going to be a hard conversation in the C-suite.
I want to ask you a last question, and it too has threads to our previous conversation. But at Visa, you compete not just with others in the fin services category, you compete with cash. And there aren't a lot of businesses who compete with money. I mean, money has many currencies, but in competing with cash and not as perhaps as much today in 2025, right? Where, cash has a very different, I suspect and I may be ignoring economic realities. I am, because the unbanked cash is still principal. But how do you compete with cash?
Well, I'll tell you historically how we've done it, and I'll tell you what's happening today. So surely in some countries where you have the unbanked, cash is still king, or if you have instability in the currency or instability in the government, cash is still king. And then you have some outliers like Germany, where very developed country, but still cash is often preferred. Is that
right?
Yeah.
Why is that? What's the attitudinal
historical feeling that what you can trust the most is this cash in your hand? And I think though what's happened, and crypto has actually helped to accelerate this, and is one of the first things that D. Hock, who was the founder of Visa, said, is that we're moving towards digital alphanumeric data as money. That's where we're going. He
knew that in the 50s.
Yes. And so he said it in 1958. And our first campaign in Visa, one of the first campaigns in Visa, was basically a plastic credit card with a money clip on it. And the tagline underneath it was, think of it as money. Right. And so the shift that's been happening when I compete against cash is like, well, if I thought of it as money, what do I get in cash that I can't get with this credit card? And the whole battle all along the way was to make sure that everything that you can find in cash, that it's accepted anywhere you go. I can go to a street vendor in Bhutan and break out my card and don't need cash. The ubiquity of it became really important.
Right.
And so that's one way to compete it. But then the most effective, once you get that, the most effective way is that the credential can do more than cash. You're protected against fraud. You're protected against theft. And so if you walk down the street with $10,000 of cash in your pocket, you're at risk. You walk down the street with a credit card that has $10,000 limit on it, you're much less at risk, particularly given zero liability. So it's the ubiquity and the security and the convenience. When you compare that to cash, it all moves you toward these credentials. Now, what's fascinating to me now, though, is that the credit card, the physical card, is also becoming less and less important. It's now the phone, right? It's on the phone. And so if that's your device, again, it's much more convenient. And you can't put cash in the phone, unless you find some slot in there that we're going to suddenly put it and it kind of dissipates into the ether. It's not going to happen. And so if the phone becomes the center of gravity for people's lives, and it's going to be digital information.
The odds are good.
The odds are going to be really good. And digital information on that phone, it's really our credentials, the tokens that we have to protect your privacy. That's what actually makes it, I think, more efficient, effective, and safer than cash. And that's been the argument.
Frank Cooper, appreciate you. Thank you for being with us.
Always good seeing you, Seth.
All right, man.
All right, man.